Hello, my name is Megan Renee and I am a current doctoral student at Aspen University. This presentation aims to examine a dissertation regarding stress management knowledge and the administration of online stress management behavioral videos. The instruction videos in this dissertation were used to increase knowledge and examine the effects on the experimental and control groups within this research. So first we'll characterize the research. So how was this dissertation selected? In one's personal opinion and personal drives, I flocked towards the field of health education and health sciences due to my background in my master's and my bachelor's. My bachelor's is in athletic training and my master's is in health science with concentrations in school health education and health administration. This led me to conduct a search through ProQuest. The limitations applied to this research had to be published within the last 3 years, relevant to health education and educational courses, and for the purposes of this presentation, the source utilized and examined had to be a doctoral dissertation. This current dissertation identifies a strong need, which is stress management. This topic comes up in everything from elementary education all the way up to work education in a professional environment. The researcher conducted an experimental online research. This type of research is highly sought after and highly reliable when examining and comparing to other types of research projects. Continuing the characterization of research, the dissertation examined health education in relation to stress management behaviors. The researcher collected qualitative data based on surveys that collected demographic and educational knowledge. As stated before, the construction of this research took on an experimental control pre-test post-test design. So there was an intervention group, there was a control group. The intervention and control groups received different educations, but both received the same pre-test and same post-test administration or assessments. Approximately 100 participants completed the full research project, and this was part of the reason for selection and the notions that aided one's personal definition of its credibility in the health education components and in its professional research. To summarize the research, as stated before, there were control and experimental groups, one per definitive role. The experimental group received 7 videos related to stress management and stress management behaviors, while the control group received videos that were solely based on nutrition and weight loss. Elements from both the stress management videos, nutrition, and the weight loss videos were assessed in the knowledge assessment administered to both groups as a pretest. The aim of this study was to examine the effects of these online educational videos on their knowledge of stress management and health in general, and the participants' intention to participate in stress management behaviors. They aim to increase the intentions of the participants in stress management behaviors and decrease their stress prevalence. So you can see how it tackled multiple aspects, but still kept relevant assessment tools. Continuation of the summary. So the participants were from Amazon M-Turk, or the Mechanical Turk. They were randomized upon consent and assignment into the research. This was a voluntary-based research. Participants consented to be in, and if they met the criteria to be an eligible participant, they were included. 152 participants were initially selected. Of that, 100 completed the research fully. 72 completed most of the assessments, and 42 completed all of the assessments, including the follow-up data that these researchers intended to collect. The researcher utilized Qualtrics, which is an online format, to administer the data collection and distribute the surveys to the participants. So there was no face-to-face interaction between the researchers and the participants. It was all over an internet database and through emailing processes through this online format. This examined a new resource in implementing aspects of health education. This research included 3 hypotheses, and the hypotheses were presented in a way that asserted that the participants in the experimental group would have an increase in knowledge of stress, impact on health, and the interaction between physical health and mental health. The second hypothesis asserted that the participants in the experimental group will demonstrate an increase in intentional engagement and stress management behaviors. The 3 they looked at included yoga, cognitive behavioral stress management, and mindfulness-based stress reduction. Lastly, the researcher examined the participants in the experimentals group with the intent that they would report higher levels of self-reported engagement in stress management behaviors than the control group. Throughout the research, the 3 hypotheses were analyzed, and the results that were yielded are demonstrated on this slide. So you can see hypothesis 1 was accepted. So they did demonstrate a higher knowledge than the control group in multiple aspects. Hypothesis 2 was also accepted, where the experimental group did demonstrate an increased intention to engage in the stress management behaviors. And unfortunately, hypothesis 3 was rejected, and there was no demonstration or no difference in the experimental and controls group willingness or self-reporting in engagement of stress management behaviors. The theoretical framework that was examined during this research included 3 models, 2 of which are very prevalent in the health community. The first is the theory of planned behavior. The second is the health belief model, and the last theory that was observed in this research was the protection motivation theory. So the theory of planned behavior analyzes an individual's attitudes towards behavior, the subjective norm, their normative belief, and their perceived behavioral control. This theory aims to explain why people perform the way that they do, or why they feel their certain actions or behaviors are continual or a part of their cycle. The health belief model intends to make a full encompassed circle where it analyzes the perceived susceptibility, severity, benefits, and barriers to a problem, the person's motivation or self-efficacy in order to handle that problem, and their cues to action. So if anything in their environment is telling them they need to address this problem. All these aspects influence someone's ability to participate or their willingness to listen and be involved in a problem identified. Lastly, the protection motivation theory examines perceived severity, vulnerability, response efficacy, and self-efficacy. So you can see their tie to the theory of planned behavior and the health belief model. This kind of brings them both into one and analyzes threats and the behaviors. So it takes those components from the health belief model and shows, okay, perceived severity, how bad is this problem? Am I vulnerable to it? And it takes the perceived control and attitudes towards behavior from the theory of planned behavior and assesses on that aspect. The researchers utilize Qualtrics, as stated before, which is an online survey software, to collect their data. The data they collected was based on a demographic questionnaire, a knowledge assessment that analyzed stress management, nutrition, body responses, and this was administered on a pre-test, post-test basis. And lastly, they administered the intent to change measure, which was administered to both the intervention or the experimental and the control group. To further dive into these measurements, the demographic questionnaire analyzed the individual's age, their gender, the ethnicity, and their educational level. And this ranged from high school all the way to a doctoral degree. The knowledge assessment, as stated previously, encompassed many aspects of health. It was a multiple choice formatted questionnaire and consisted of 32 questions. The intent to change measure analyzed the individual's intent to administer the behaviors that they have learned through this process. This measurement consisted of a Likert scale 1 to 7, 1 being not likely and 7 being very likely. This consisted of 12 questions that the individual had to scale based on their feelings towards the behavior in question. The data that was collected was analyzed using SPSS, which is a statistical software. The researcher utilized a case-wise deletion. This removed any incomplete data from analysis to give them a full encompassed view of their data. The researcher also conducted a chi-square test of association, and this was to analyze the differences in demographic values. A ANCOVA test was used to analyze hypothesis 1 and 2, while hypothesis 3 was analyzed using a one-way ANOVA assessment. Of that analysis, the researcher found in the demographic data 65.8% completed the study. The most prominent age group was 25 to 34, and the study was predominantly female. The chi-square test of association demonstrated no significant difference between control and experimental group ages. When observing the data in the dissertation, the groups were very similarly dispersed, and the ages were very similar based from the control group and experimental group reportings. The ANCOVA test demonstrated that there was a statistical significant difference in post-test stress knowledge between the experimental and the control group. This affirmed hypothesis 1. This assessment also proved that there was a statistical significant difference in post-test intentional scores, which affirmed hypothesis 2. The ANOVA assessment proved that there was no significant difference in intended behaviors and self-reported behaviors between the experimental and control group. This rejected hypothesis 3. In conclusion, this dissertation collected a tremendous amount of qualitative data and was able to analyze multiple facets of stress management and health education between the experimental and the control groups. This dissertation, with support of other resources, aided in the completion of this presentation, and the evaluation of this research.